Public debt. You see this number in the news all the time, right? It's so massive, it's kind of meaningless. But what if it's one of the most powerful forces shaping our world? A force that can build entire civilizations or tear them down. So let's dive in and figure out what it really is. A tool for progress or a trap just waiting to spring.
To really wrap our heads around this, we can't just stare at spreadsheets. We have to start with a question, a very human one. What does a financial crisis actually sound like? You see, debt isn't this silent, abstract thing. It has a sound. Sometimes it's the gut-wrenching roar of traders on a stock exchange floor watching a country's entire currency collapse in a matter of hours. And other times, it's the terrifying, dead silence of a crowd of people lined up outside a bank, just hoping, praying they can get their life savings out before the doors are locked for good.
And that sound, it brings us to one of the most legendary showdowns in financial history. This is the story of a single investor who went head-to-head with an entire country. It's the day the market taught the state a lesson it would never forget. So picture this. It's September 1992. The UK has made a big promise to keep the British pound artificially strong against Germany's currency, the mark. But here's the catch. Germany, dealing with its own issues, needed to crank up interest rates. The UK, stuck in a recession, desperately needed to slash them. They were basically tied together in a three-legged race, but trying to run in opposite directions. It was a promise that was economically impossible. It was bound to break. And you know who saw this weakness from a mile away? The speculator, George Soros. He and his team realized the UK was bluffing. They started betting billions against the pound. And when one of his partners suggested a huge bet, Soros famously told him, "Go for the jugular." This wasn't some timid little hedge. This was an all-out assault, based on what they saw as pure economic certainty. And the result? The Bank of England threw billions of dollars trying to defend the pound, but it was useless. They had to surrender. The pound crashed. And in a single day, George Soros made $1 billion. $1 billion. The British taxpayers, of course, lost billions. This whole episode gave birth to a powerful new force in the world, the Bond Vigilantes. Think of them like this. They're investors who can act as a kind of shadow government. If they don't like a country's policies, they can just start dumping that country's bonds. This floods the market, crashes the price, and suddenly makes it way more expensive for that government to borrow money. They can literally force a country to change course.
And nothing captures this new power dynamic better than this quote from political strategist James Carville. Think about what he's saying. The real power, the ability to intimidate everyone, wasn't in the White House anymore. It was held by these faceless investors in the bond market. That's a huge shift in who runs the world. So, is debt always this destructive monster? Not at all. And to really get it, we need a really simple analogy. Let's call it the tractor and the wedding. Okay, imagine a farmer takes out a loan. If she uses it to buy a tractor, that's productive debt. The tractor helps her grow more crops, which means more income. She can easily pay back the loan and is actually richer than before. That's the tractor. But what if she uses that same loan to throw an incredibly lavish wedding? The party's over in a day, but the debt is just this dead weight. It creates no future income. It's a pure burden. That's the wedding. The crucial question is always, what is the debt for? And when a whole country uses debt to buy a giant economy-wide tractor, well, the results can be absolutely spectacular. This is debt as the engine of progress. I mean, just look at history. The U.S. Interstate Highway System, all funded by public debt, was a massive tractor. It connected the entire country, supercharged business, and created wealth we're still benefiting from today. And then there's DARPA, the government's wild research agency. Public debt gave us the internet, GPS, the touchscreen you might be holding right now. These investments paid for themselves thousands of times over. But what happens when a country uses its debt to throw a party? A huge, nationwide wedding with nothing to show for it afterwards. Well, then you get the hangover. And I'm not talking about a headache. I'm talking about a world-historic, economy-destroying hangover. Let's go to Germany in 1923. The government had to pay for the war, so they just started printing money like crazy. The result was hyperinflation on a scale that is just hard to process. In January, a loaf of bread cost 250 marks. Okay, by September, that same loaf was 1.5 million marks. And then, just 2 months later, in November, one loaf of bread cost 200 billion marks. The speed is just staggering. It got so absurd that this story started going around.
A guy leaves a wheelbarrow full of cash outside a bakery. When he comes back, the cash is still there, piled on the sidewalk, but the wheelbarrow was gone. A physical wheelbarrow had become more valuable than a mountain of money. The currency was literally trash. It wiped out an entire generation's savings.
And if you think that's just ancient history, let's look at the Greek debt crisis. For years, they borrowed billions for consumption. The perfect example was the 2004 Olympics. A spectacular global wedding, right? But it left behind rotting, useless stadiums, the ultimate unproductive asset. And the hangover? A brutal austerity program and a depression that shrank their economy by a quarter.
Okay, so this is where it gets really weird and honestly pretty confusing for a lot of people. If high debt is so dangerous, how come some countries seem to play by a totally different set of rules? This is the great debt paradox.
I mean, check this out. You'd think the country with the most debt would be in the most danger, right? It just makes sense. But no. Japan's debt is astronomical, way, way higher than Greece or Argentina's were when their economies completely imploded. Yet, Japan is totally stable. What is going on here? Clearly, the size of the debt isn't the whole story. And here is the secret. It's the answer to the paradox. It's not about how much you owe. It's about who you owe it to and in what currency. See, Japan borrows in its own currency, the yen, mostly from its own citizens. If things get dicey, the Bank of Japan can just print more yen to pay its bills. They're in control. But Argentina, they borrow in US dollars. And guess what? Argentina can't print US dollars. So it all comes down to control. And understanding that paradox, well, it changes everything. It brings us right into the middle of the biggest economic debate of our time, and to one last question about what all this means for our future. This has led to this really provocative, some would say radical new idea called modern monetary theory, or MMT. Basically, its supporters look at Japan and say, wait a minute, a country that controls its own currency literally can't go broke. They argue the only real speed limit on government spending isn't some scary debt number, it's actual real-world inflation. It's a game-changing idea that's reshaping the whole conversation. So when you boil it all down, debt isn't good or evil. It's just a tool, a ridiculously powerful one. In the hands of a skilled surgeon, it's a scalpel. It can build the future and fund innovation. But used recklessly, it's just a knife. And it can cause catastrophic, indiscriminate damage. And that leaves us with the one question that truly matters. We've all been asking the wrong question. It's not, how big is the debt? The real question, the one we should all be asking, is, what are we building with it? Are we buying a tractor for the next generation, or are we just throwing a massive party and sticking them with the bill? The answer to that question, well, that's going to define the world they inherit.